Welcome to the History Maps podcast. You are standing on a 45-degree mountain slope, 4,000 meters above sea level.
The air is so thin your lungs just burn.
Right, and the topsoil is practically non-existent. Plus, freezing hail is starting to fall.
It's a brutal reality.
It really is. Now, your task is to figure out how to feed 10 million people from this dirt, completely without a wheel, without iron, and without a single draft animal.
Which sounds completely unfeasible to a modern farmer.
Exactly. We are jumping right into a massive chapter in the history of agriculture today for this deep dive, focusing entirely on the agricultural system of the Inca civilization.
And we have a very specific set of sources for this deep dive.
We do. We are looking at historical texts from early chroniclers who saw the remnants of this system, precise archaeological studies of ancient infrastructure, and modern climate research that tracks centuries of ecological data.
So we are pulling from a lot of different disciplines to reconstruct this.
Yes, because our mission is to unpack this complex reality. We want to understand how a civilization in one of the most hostile environments on Earth solved agricultural problems, and how that ancient tech is, actually solving modern climate crises today.
To really get a grasp on the agricultural mechanics at play, you have to look at the severe parameters of the Andean landscape itself.
The environment we are analyzing is just relentless.
It is. We are dealing with extreme elevations. When you move past 3,000 meters and push toward, say, 4,000 meters, the physical realities of botany completely change.
Because of the oxygen levels, right?
Exactly. The oxygen is very thin, which actively affects plant respiration. But beyond that, the slopes are exceptionally steep.
Meaning gravity is just constantly pulling everything downward.
Right, pulling water and topsoil straight down, which promotes severe erosion. But honestly, the most challenging variable is the thermal volatility.
The temperature swings.
Yes. The weather in the Andes does not follow gentle seasonal curves. It is characterized by sudden, lethal frosts.
Frosts that just materialize overnight?
Overnight, plus destructive hailstorms that can shred a whole canopy of leaves in a matter of minutes.
That is intense.
And that is followed by extended, punishing dry periods that bake the earth. And then those dry periods are abruptly followed by intense, localized rains that threaten to just wash everything away.
So the environment actively resists human cultivation at every single level?
Completely.
If the land is this hostile, how do you even secure a baseline of food, let alone build an empire?
That is the core question.
I mean, it seems like every geographic and meteorological variable is working against the accumulation of a food surplus. You can't just, plant a massive field of wheat like you would in a temperate river valley.
You can't rely on a single plain, which is exactly why they developed a mastery over what anthropologists call the vertical archipelago.
The vertical archipelago?
Right. The methodology here relies on understanding the relationship between altitude and temperature. Because the Andes are so incredibly steep, ascending a mountain slope by just a few hundred meters is climatically equivalent to traveling thousands of miles away from the equator on flat ground.
Wait, so just walking up a hill changes the climate that drastically?
It does. You are passing through entirely different ecological biomes in the space of a single afternoon's walk.
Okay, I see.
So the Incas identified 4 distinct climatic zones, basically stacked on top of one another. They realized that instead of fighting the mountain to grow one single staple crop, they could farm specific plants at varying elevations.
Based on the exact needs of those plants?
Yes, based on highly precise temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure needs. They engineered a vertical gradient of agriculture.
Instead of expanding outward on a horizontal axis, their agricultural footprint just went straight up and down.
Vertically upward and downward.
So they're essentially stacking their farms. You have a society operating a staggered, multi-level agricultural system where the mountain itself dictates the crop.
Exactly.
But to feed 10 million people, you need serious volume. What exactly are they planting across these different vertical zones?
The volume is achieved through a level of crop diversity that modern industrial agriculture rarely even attempts.
We're talking a lot of different plants.
A massive number of species. In the lower, warmer, and more humid elevations, they cultivated maize, coca leaves, beans, and various indigenous grains.
Okay, the standard staples.
Right, but as you move higher into the colder, harsher zones, they relied heavily on tubers. They cultivated over 6,000 distinct varieties of potatoes.
Let me stop you right there, because 6,000 varieties sounds like a typographical error.
It is an accurate figure.
Why would any society need 6,000 different types of potatoes? That seems like an administrative nightmare.
It functions as a massive genetic insurance policy.
Insurance against the climate.
Exactly. A specific variety of potato might possess a genetic mutation that allows it to survive a sudden frost at, say, 3,800 meters.
Okay, so it can handle the cold.
Right. And another variety might have thicker skin that resists a highly localized nematode, or maybe a specific type of rot during the heavy rains.
So you aren't just banking on one type of crop succeeding.
No. By planting a massive mosaic of different varieties, a localized blight or an unseasonal freeze might wipe out 20 varieties.
But the other 5,980 will survive.
Precisely. And alongside the potatoes, they cultivated other hardy tubers, like sweet potatoes, oluco, oca, and mashua.
Those last two, oca and mashua, are particularly vital, right?
They are, because they contain compounds that naturally repel insects.
So they act as their own pesticides.
Yes, allowing them to thrive in poor soils without any chemical intervention.
And the portfolio extends far beyond tubers and maize. The historical records show they were systematically growing pepper, tomatoes, peanuts, cashews, squash, cucumber, quinoa, gourd, cotton, tarwi, carob, shirimoya, lucuma guayabo, and avocado.
It is a staggering list.
It really is. The logistical management of harvesting and distributing that many different biological organisms across different altitudes is just huge.
You certainly cannot have individual farmers randomly claiming patches of a mountain and expect the system to hold together.
So how did the state organize the physical land to guarantee this vertical archipelago actually functioned efficiently?
The land distribution was mathematically structured. They used a highly specific bureaucratic system and a unit of measurement known as the tupu.
The tupu.
Right. The fundamental principle was that the state owned all the land, but it was rigorously distributed based on demographic need and caloric requirement.
Rather than inherited wealth.
Exactly. When a couple married, they received one tupu of land. However, you have to understand that a tupu was not a standardized measurement of physical area, like an acre or hectare.
It wasn't a set size.
No, it was a fluid measurement of productive capacity. It represented the exact amount of land required to sustain a specific number of people for one single year.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this. Are you saying the physical size of a tupu would actually expand or contract depending on the geography?
That is the precise mechanism.
Okay.
A tupu located in a highly fertile, low-altitude valley with access to constant water would be physically quite small.
Because you can grow a lot of food in a small space there.
Yes, but a tupu located on a rocky, high-altitude slope where the soil is thin and the growing season is short.
That would have to be physically massive.
Exactly. The administrators were not calculating square meters. They were calculating caloric output. The goal was equity in sustenance, not equity in physical property.
And then families change size over time, which means their caloric needs change.
And the system accounted for those biological changes.
So the newly married couple receives their base tupu.
Yes. And if they had a boy, they received an additional half a tupu. If they had a girl, they received an additional quarter of a tupu.
The sources cite that the reasoning for the discrepancy between a boy and a girl was based on the projected physical labor requirements.
Right. It was tied to the specific types of physical tasks assigned within their communal labor system.
Got it.
Furthermore, the state provided an extra half tupu for the birth of the very first child.
Recognizing the sudden initial burden of starting a family unit.
Exactly.
So what happens when someone dies? In European feudal system, the land stays in the family and wealth consolidates over generations, which creates massive disparities.
Consolidation was entirely prevented by the structure of the Inca system. If a landowner died without heirs, the land did not remain dormant, and it did not stay within extended family hands indefinitely.
Where did it go?
It reverted immediately back to the Ilu.
The Ilu being the community.
Yes, the localized, extended community unit, essentially the fundamental building block of Inca society. The Ilu leaders would then redistribute that specific plot of land to newly formed families.
Or maybe to families whose existing plots were no longer producing enough calories due to soil exhaustion.
Exactly. The land was in a constant state of calculated rotation.
Okay, managing the caloric output of millions of people on paper, or their version of paper, is one thing. But physically altering a hostile mountain to actually produce those calories is another.
It required monumental engineering.
You mentioned earlier that gravity and steep slopes promote severe soil erosion. During the rainy season, any topsoil on a 45-degree slope should just wash right down into the river.
It would under natural conditions.
So how did they anchor the soil to the mountain?
They physically sculpted the mountains through the construction of terracing, which they called andines.
Andeans.
Yes. But it is important to note that the Inca did not just invent the terrace out of thin air. The origins of Andean terracing stretch back significantly, tracing back to the year 2000 BCE.
So the foundation was already there.
Earlier civilizations laid the groundwork. Specifically the Huarpa culture, and later the Wari culture, who expanded terrace networks from the years 500 to 1000.
But the Inca took it further.
The Inca, operating from 1438 to 1533, took this foundational technology and scaled it exponentially.
Exponentially is a good word for it.
At the absolute peak of the empire, these engineered stone terraces covered 1 million hectares.
To visualize the scale of that, that is roughly 2,500,000 acres of completely transformed vertical terrain.
It is an incomprehensible amount of earth moved by hand.
1 million hectares of hand-built stone staircases carved into the Andes. But it is more than just making a flat space to stand on. I like to think of these terraces as a thermal battery.
A thermal battery is a very accurate way to describe the physics at play.
Right. So during the day, you have these massive continuous walls of stone facing the sun. They are absorbing shortwave solar radiation for 10 or 12 hours straight.
Soaking up all that heat?
Exactly. Then, when the sun drops behind the peaks and the temperature plummets, the threat of high-altitude frost rolls in.
Which is deadly to the crops.
But those millions of tons of stone begin to slowly emit that stored heat as long-wave radiation. They are continuously bleeding heat into the soil and the immediate air boundary.
Essentially keeping the plants wrapped in a localized thermal blanket through the freezing night. What's fascinating here is how that specific thermodynamic manipulation fundamentally altered their agricultural capacity.
It wasn't just a convenient side effect.
No, that thermal battery effect was a biological necessity for cultivating prestige crops, primarily maize.
Maize is pretty demanding, isn't it?
Maize is a highly demanding crop compared to a hardy potato. It requires a substantive amount of nitrogen and water, but most critically, it is exceptionally vulnerable to cold temperatures.
So it normally can't grow high up in the mountains.
Under standard, unmodified Andean conditions, the absolute biological cultivation limit for maize was 3,200 meters above sea level.
Any higher, and the ambient temperature drops too low.
Too low for the biological processes of the plant to function. But because the stone walls of the Andes retained and radiated heat so effectively, the microclimate directly above the terrace soil was degrees warmer than the surrounding air.
So they changed the climate of the mountain face itself?
Yes. By engineering the landscape, the Incas successfully pushed the cultivation limit of maize up to 3,500 meters.
Pushing the limit up by 300 meters might not sound like much on paper, but when you multiply that 300-meter vertical band across the entire length of the Andean mountain range, you are suddenly opening up hundreds of thousands of acres of new, viable land.
Viable land for a high-calorie, culturally significant crop.
But I want to look closely at the physical construction of these terraces. You cannot just stack rocks, throw dirt behind them, and expect it to survive a torrential downpour.
Definitely not.
The water pressure would build up in the dirt and just blow the stone wall out.
The internal architecture of the Andes reveals a profound grasp of granular physics and soil mechanics.
What does the inside actually look like?
If you were to slice an Inca terrace in half and look at the cross-section, you would see a highly deliberate stratification.
Distinct layers.
Right. The outer retaining wall was built of carefully fitted stone, often angled slightly inward against the slope to utilize gravity for stability.
Leaning into the mountain.
Exactly. And directly behind that stone wall, at the very base resting against the bedrock, they laid a thick foundation of large stones, cobbles, and boulders.
Just massive rocks at the bottom.
Yes. And this bottom layer created large macroscopic voids, essentially an empty cavern network for water to move through rapidly.
So they are building an internal drainage pipe system out of raw boulders.
Exactly that principle.
Yep.
Above the boulder layer, they deposited a thick stratum of smaller gravel.
To catch the dirt.
Partially, because above the gravel went a layer of fine sand. And finally, on top of the sand, they placed a thick top layer of highly fertile topsoil.
And they didn't just use whatever dirt was lying around, did they?
Rarely. They rarely used the local soil found at that specific altitude because it was usually thin and nutrient poor. They physically imported massive quantities of topsoil from the rich valley floors,
Hauling it all the way up the mountainside.
hauling it on their backs.
That layering topsoil, sand, gravel, boulders is essentially a massive mountainside water filter.
It acts as a highly efficient natural drainage mechanism. When those severe Andean rains strike, the water does not pool on the surface and drown the roots of the plants, which causes rot.
Water goes straight down.
Exactly. More importantly, the water does not saturate the soil to the point where it builds up hydrostatic pressure against the stone retaining wall.
The sand acts as a particulate filter.
Yes, preventing the valuable topsoil from washing away into the rocks below. The water then hits the gravel and the boulders, flowing rapidly outward and downward, exiting the terrace safely.
So they neutralize the threat of soil erosion while still retaining exactly the capillary moisture the plant roots needed within the topsoil layer.
It is brilliant engineering.
We see terrace farming in other mountainous regions of the world, specifically in Asia. You look at the iconic sweeping rice terraces in places like China, the Philippines, or Vietnam, and visually, they look very similar to the Andes.
Visually, yes.
But the underlying engineering logic seems entirely different to me. How does the Inca system compare mechanically to Asian terracing?
The visual similarity masks a stark contrast in both purpose and hydrological execution. What's fascinating here is when analyzing Asian terrace farming, you first have to look at the altitude. Asian terraces are typically situated at moderate altitudes, generally built between 500 and 1,500 meters above sea level.
Much lower than the Andes.
Right. The Inca terraces, as we established, are operating in extreme hypoxic environments, from 2,500 up to 4,000 meters.
Okay, altitude is the first difference. What's the second?
Secondly, the biological needs of the primary crops dictate the physical engineering. Asian terraces are primarily constructed for wet rice cultivation.
Which means they need standing water.
Exactly. Therefore, the terraces are engineered as gravity-fed basins designed to hold water in. They intentionally flood the terraces and rely on a slow, controlled overflow from one level to the next.
So the goal in Asia is to trap the water and keep the soil completely saturated.
Yes, whereas the Inca terraces were built primarily for potatoes, maize, and quinoa. These crops will die if the roots are submerged for extended periods.
So they have to drain the water.
The Inca engineering requires those deep, multi-level filtration systems we just discussed to prevent waterlogging.
So to summarize the hydrology, Asian terraces are engineered to hold water in, while Inca terraces are engineered to filter water out.
That is the core distinction.
And the materials reflect that difference too, don't they?
They do. Because Asian terraces deal with gentler slopes and the need to retain water, they are often heavily soil-based, utilizing compacted mud, dry stone, or wood for the retaining walls.
But the Inca couldn't do that.
Right, fighting steeper gradients and requiring rapid drainage, the Inca rely heavily on finely carved structural stone and highly specific imported soils.
And the ecological strategy diverges as well.
Asian terracing often supports a monoculture, entire mountainsides, dedicated solely to rice or dual crop zones depending on the season. The Inca system, intrinsically tied to the vertical archipelago strategy, managed up to 20 distinct ecological floors on a single mountain face.
Juggling dozens of different species simultaneously.
Exactly.
Here is where we hit a logistical wall. You have engineered these brilliantly drained terraces, you have imported the soil, you have built the thermal batteries.
Right.
But none of that matters if the plants do not get water. And at 4,000 meters, relying purely on erratic rainfall is a deadly gamble.
It is entirely unsustainable.
The Inca viewed water not just as a utility, but as a deeply sacred element. It was intrinsically tied to their daily life, their cosmology, and their spirituality.
Every river, lake, and spring was revered.
Often perceived as a physical housing for specific deities. That theological philosophy dictated an absolute, pragmatic need to honor, preserve, and control every single drop of water that fell on the empire.
And that reverence translated into a legacy of hydraulic engineering that remains structurally sound half a millennium after it was built.
Which is just staggering to think about.
A prime example of this mastery is the archaeological site of Taipan. Taipan is widely considered a masterpiece of sophisticated irrigation and fluid dynamics.
What makes Taipan so special?
The Incas constructed a highly calculated network of channels, aqueducts, and ditches that drew fresh water from natural underground springs and distributed it evenly across the agricultural terraces.
Okay, so a complex aqueduct system.
But the genius of Taipan lies in its specialized sedimentation channels.
How does a sedimentation channel work in this context?
It relies on understanding the velocity of water and suspended particles. Water rushing rapidly down a mountain carries heavy silt, rocks, and debris.
It's dirty water.
Right. If you run that dirty water directly into a fine agricultural irrigation network, the narrow channels will immediately clog.
The water will back up and the whole system fails.
Exactly. At Tipon, they engineered specific sections of the main channel to widen and flatten out, deliberately slowing the velocity of the water.
Okay, so it enters a wide basin.
Yes. When the water slows down, it loses the kinetic energy required to carry heavy particles. The heavy silt and debris naturally settle out and drop to the bottom of these widened channels.
Which could then be periodically cleaned by workers.
Right. The water that continues flowing past the sedimentation zone and into the agricultural sectors is completely clean and clear.
Perfectly suitable for the crops and preventing the degradation of the finer irrigation networks.
It shows an advanced understanding of fluid dynamics.
We see this exact level of fluid mastery at military and urban sites as well. Take Ollantaytambo, for instance.
A massive military fortress.
Yes, and an urban center. They engineered an intricate series of underground channels and fountains that supplied the fortress with constant fresh water. But they did not waste the runoff.
They recycled it.
Those same channels were mathematically graded to seamlessly integrate with the expansive agricultural lands situated in the valley below the fortress.
They utilized gravity drops and precise channel narrowing to control the hydrostatic pressure,
ensuring the water was distributed flawlessly across the fields without tearing up the topsoil.
We also see highly specialized water management at the most famous site of all, Machu Picchu.
Okay, Machu Picchu.
For decades, the academic community debated a central question about this site. How were the extensive agricultural terraces at Machu Picchu watered?
Because it's perched so high up.
Right. The urban and ceremonial sectors of the city had a highly complex spring-fed canal system that provided drinking water to the fountains. But did that system extend out to the farms?
It's a valid question.
A rigorous, substantive study published by the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers, or ASA, sought to definitively answer this question.
Through modern mathematical modeling.
Yes.
What kind of math are they using to figure out ancient irrigation?
The researchers utilized modern climatological records and combined them with long-term, historic annual ice accumulation data.
Ice data from where?
Extracted from the Quelccaya ice cap. This allowed them to accurately model the ancient climate patterns during the exact time of the Inca occupation.
So they know exactly what the weather was doing.
Right. Once they had the ancient weather data, they applied the Penman-Monteith method.
I want to break down the Penman-Monteith method because it sounds incredibly dense.
It is a complex equation.
To put it simply, this is an equation used to calculate evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is essentially calculating a plant's sweat rate.
That is a very good analogy.
You are calculating exactly how much moisture a specific stalk of maize exhales into the thin mountain air through its leaves versus how much water it actively drinks from the soil.
And the mass requires plugging in some heavy variables.
Like solar radiation, wind speed, the vapor pressure deficit in the air, and the specific biology of the plant itself.
So the ASAB researchers were calculating exactly how much water a potato or a stalk of maize would biologically require to survive.
Specifically at the altitude, humidity, and temperature of Machu Picchu.
Yes. They measured the surface area of the terraces, calculated the precise water needs of the crops using Penman-Monteith, and compared that to the modeled ancient rainfall data from the ice caps.
And what did the math reveal?
The ASAB study concluded that the agricultural terraces at Machu Picchu were entirely rain-fed.
Rain-fed.
Yes, they were not irrigated by the complex canal systems that fed the urban fountains. The equation proved that the annual precipitation alone was mathematically sufficient to sustain the crops planted on those specific slopes.
So they didn't need to build irrigation for those terraces because the rain was actually enough.
Exactly. But the study uncovered a secondary, highly significant conclusion.
What was that?
They computed the annual potential nutrient production of those terraces using kilocalorie equivalents.
Okay, so how much food they could physically grow.
Right. They looked at how many calories of maize and potatoes could physically grow on the available terrace space, even with optimal rainfall.
And
They proved definitively that the agricultural terraces immediately surrounding Machu Picchu could not possibly have supported the daily caloric and nutrient needs of the roughly 1,000 royal inhabitants, priests, and retainers who occupied the site.
the math simply does not work.
No. The food required to keep that city alive had to be heavily imported from surrounding, highly productive, lower elevation valleys.
Machu Picchu was a net consumer of calories, heavily reliant on the logistical network of the broader empire.
It could not feed itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we want to talk about highly productive, engineered agricultural zones designed to push the boundaries of what can be grown, we have to look at Moray.
Moray is incredible.
It is one of the most visually striking sights in the Andes. It looks like a massive Roman amphitheater that has been pushed deep down into the earth.
It's a series of sunken circles.
Right. It consists of these deep, perfectly concentric, circular terraces descending layer by layer into the ground. It is completely different from the linear terraces clinging to the mountainsides.
Moray operates on a completely different set of thermodynamic principles, and it is widely considered by archaeologists and botanists to be an advanced agricultural laboratory.
A laboratory.
Yes. The physical geometry and the sheer depth of these circular depressions create a highly localized set of microclimates.
Because cold air sinks.
Exactly. Cold air sinks, and solar radiation hits the different angles of the circular walls at different times of the day.
So the temperature differential is extreme.
The temperature difference between the highest outermost terrace ring and the lowest central terrace ring at the bottom of the bowl is a full 15 degrees Celsius.
A 15 Celsius difference in a single physical location is massive.
It fundamentally changes what you can grow.
By constructing these descending concentric rings, the Incas effectively simulated the varying climates of the empire.
Precisely.
The bottom ring simulates the warmer, sheltered valleys. The middle rings simulate the mid-elevation climates. And the top rings simulate the freezing, high mountain passes.
They built a localized microcosm of the entire Andean geography in one single site.
And they controlled the variables perfectly. Just like the standard Andeans, the soil at Moray was not local.
Archaeological soil analysis demonstrates that they intentionally imported dirt from entirely different regions of the empire.
Coastal soil, jungle soil, high-altitude soil.
They brought these soils to Moray to test how specific crops from those distinct regions would react to the engineered microclimates of the circular terraces.
So they were actively running controlled experiments. They were selectively breeding plants.
They would take a potato that normally grows at 3,000 meters, plant it in a slightly warmer or cooler ring of Moray, and observe the phenotypic plasticity.
They were forcing genetic drift to develop new, hardier strains of crops that could then be distributed back out to the empire.
It is a rigorous application of the scientific method applied directly to botany.
Furthermore, Moray perfectly demonstrates their total mastery of subsurface drainage, which we touched on earlier.
Yes, the drainage at Moray is crucial.
During the wet season, the region experiences torrential, heavy rains. Given that Moray is a massive, deep bowl in the earth, it should logically fill up with water and become a lake.
But the lowest central circle of Moray never floods.
Never.
Never. The thousands of gallons of rainwater simply vanish into the earth, indicating a highly sophisticated yet unexcavated underground drainage network built beneath the bedrock.
That actively pulls the water away from the side, maintaining the integrity of the soil in the lowest rings.
Exactly.
But not all Inca agriculture relied on carving terraces and deep drainage systems. The empire spanned multiple geographies, and when you move south into the Altiplano, the rules change entirely.
The Altiplano is a vast high plain.
The terrain is relatively flat, so you don't need terraces, but the climate is brutal.
It's characterized by severe, prolonged drought cycles, followed directly by massive flooding.
All while sitting at freezing altitudes. How did they farm a flat, freezing flood zone?
In the Altiplano, they utilized an entirely different technique known as waru-waru, or raised beds.
Raised beds.
Right. Instead of carving into a slope, the labor force dug long parallel trenches into the flat earth.
Baking down.
Yes. They took the excavated soil from the trenches and piled it up between them to create elevated planting platforms.
This created a corrugated landscape of alternating ditches and raised beds.
Exactly.
And what does that specific shape achieve?
The ditches on either side of the raised platform served a critical dual purpose, adapting to both extremes of the Altiplano climate.
So during the heavy rainy season, when the plains naturally flood,
the deep ditches acted as drainage canals. They channeled the excess floodwaters away from the plant roots on the raised beds, entirely preventing root rot and waterlogging.
And during the dry, freezing periods?
During the cold season, the system flips its function. The water standing in the ditches acts as a thermal mass.
Okay, because water holds heat.
Right. Water has a high specific heat capacity, meaning it absorbs solar radiation very efficiently during the intense high-altitude daylight hours.
So it warms up during the day.
Yes. When night falls and the freezing temperatures arrive, the water in the ditches slowly radiates that stored heat upward.
Enveloping the raised beds in warmer air.
This localized warming mitigates the severe high-altitude frosts and physically extends the viable growing season by weeks.
Allowing crops to mature in an environment where they would normally freeze to death.
It's an elegant solution to a severe problem.
We have discussed 1,000,000 hectares of stone terraces, immense irrigation networks, raised beds traversing the high plains, and massive agricultural laboratories carved into the earth.
We have covered a lot of ground.
Which leads to a glaring mechanical question. How do you farm 1,000,000 hectares without a plow pulled by an animal?
That is the defining labor constraint.
We established in the beginning that they had no wheel, no iron tools, and absolutely zero draft animals. In Europe and Asia, agricultural expansion was driven by the ox and the horse pulling an iron plow.
Right.
Without that, who is doing the physical labor of turning millions of tons of soil?
The labor was organized, mandated, and extracted through a highly structured system known as the mita.
The mita.
Yes, the mita was a state-sponsored communal corvée labor system.
So a labor tax.
Essentially, in the Inca Empire, there was no monetary currency. You did not pay your taxes with coins.
How did you pay?
Every able-bodied citizen owed a specific, calculated amount of physical labor to the state each year.
This communal labor force was mobilized on a staggering scale.
The mita workers were deployed to carve the mountain terraces, dig the irrigation canals, construct the massive stone fortresses, and pave the 40,000 kilometers of road networks.
And the mita was just one layer of the labor organization. You also have the mitmakuna.
The colonies.
Right. These were entire communities or ethnic groups that the state would physically uproot and relocate to different parts of the empire.
If the state conquered a new fertile valley, but it lacked a loyal workforce, they would march thousands of mitmakuna there to build the terraces and farm the land.
Ensuring agricultural output and pacifying the region at the same time.
Exactly.
And you had the Yanakuna, who were specialized, hereditary retainers with lifelong labor obligations, serving the nobility and the religious institutions.
The state controlled the human physical energy down to the individual calorie.
And regarding the animals, we must clarify their role. The Inca did possess domesticated animals.
Specifically camelids, the llamas, and the alpacas.
But you cannot hook a llama to a plow.
You really cannot.
Why not? If you have 1,000 llamas, why not build a yoke and make them pull?
It comes down to basic physiology and skeletal structure. Camelids have padded feet, not hard hooves like oxen or horses.
So they slip.
They do not have the traction necessary to pull a heavy implement through dense, rocky soil.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, their skeletal structure, particularly their backs, cannot support the heavy, sustained pulling force required for plowing. You would severely injure or kill the animal.
And they belong higher up the mountain anyway.
Yes, their biology is adapted to extreme altitudes. They were pastured high up in the Andes, mostly above 4,000 meters, grazing on tough puna grass.
Well above the primary cultivation zones where the plowing needed to happen.
Exactly.
If they aren't plowing, what is their economic value to the state?
The camelids were essential, but their utility lay elsewhere. They provided vast quantities of wool for the highly valued textile industry.
And meat.
They provided meat, which, as we will discuss, was heavily preserved. They functioned as a form of transportable, breathing wealth.
Crucially, they were the logistical backbone of the Inca military, serving as pack animals.
A llama can carry up to 30 kilograms of supplies over narrow, steep road networks where a wheeled cart could never pass.
And they provided fertilizer.
Yes, their most critical contribution to the agricultural sector was nitrogen.
Llama dung.
Dried llama dung was meticulously collected by workers and systematically distributed across the agricultural terraces to replenish the soil nutrients.
In coastal areas, they supplemented this by mining guano from seabirds.
And using discarded fish heads, placing one head in the hole with each seed of maize.
The state recognized the camelids as a vital national security resource.
They did not leave herd management to chance. The administration conducted a strict, empire-wide census every single November.
To count, categorize, and document every individual animal in the state's herds.
Which could range from a localized herd of a few hundred to massive state-owned herds of tens of thousands.
So if the llamas are strictly pack animals and fertilizer producers, the humans are the ones physically plowing the earth.
By hand.
And they relied on a highly specific, deceptively simple set of manual tools. The most famous and most critical of these is the chaquitaclia, or the Andean foot plow.
the Chiquitacla.
To visualize this tool, it is essentially a sturdy pole, roughly human height, made of very hard wood.
Sometimes the tip was hardened in fire, or later tipped with bronze.
About a foot from the bottom point, there's a protruding footrest tied to the main pole, and at the top, there's a curved handle.
The ergonomics of the Chiquitacla are brilliant.
How so?
It leverages the strongest muscles in the human body. The farmer drives the pointed end into the dense sod, steps heavily onto the footrest, and uses their entire body weight to force the blade deep into the earth.
Pushing down with the legs.
Right. They then pull back on the handle, using the pole as a lever to pry up massive, deep clods of earth.
But the Chiquitacla is not used in isolation. It is part of a tool ecosystem.
Correct.
Once the clod is pried up, you have the racana. This is a specialized hoe made from a dense indigenous wood called chachacuma attached to a sharpened cobblestone.
The racana was used for precise weeding and for delicately harvesting tubers without slicing them open.
And then you had the wakana, known as the clodbuster.
Essentially a heavy club.
Used to smash the large chunks of earth turned over by the Chiquitacla into fine, plantable soil.
How do you farm 1 million hectares without a plow pulled by an animal? The answer is immense, localized, human physical effort.
It seems archaic compared to dragging a metal blade behind a horse.
It might seem that way, but there's a distinct reason this specific wooden tool has survived for centuries.
Because you can still see it today.
If you go to the Central Andes today, modern Peru has access to contemporary mechanized farming equipment. You can buy a tractor, but you will still see farmers utilizing the Chiquitacla.
Why not use a tractor?
The tool persists because it is ecologically and ergonomically perfect for the parameters of the landscape.
Right, because of the steep slopes.
A modern, heavy diesel tractor simply cannot navigate a 45-degree terrace slope.
It would roll over.
Even if you get it up there, a tractor cannot reach the very edges of an angled field without destroying the stone retaining wall or risking a fatal rollover.
Mechanization requires flat, open space.
Furthermore, even if you brought in traditional oxen pulling a steel plow, the plow cannot cut deeply enough or at the correct angle to form the specific high ridges required for cultivating potatoes in the Andean climate.
Why do potatoes need high ridges?
During the rainy season, water saturates the top layer of soil. If a potato is growing in flat earth, it sits in the water and succumbs to rot.
So they manually pile the dirt up.
By using the Chiquitacla, farmers can manually construct elevated, highly precise soil ridges.
The tuber grows safely inside the drained ridge, while the excess water runs off in the furrows between them.
The Chiquitacla remains the most efficient, surgically precise tool for gently working steep, fragile soils without causing catastrophic erosion.
And the physical act of using these tools was deeply communal. The fields were almost never worked by isolated individuals.
They worked in highly synchronized teams.
You would typically see 7 or 8 men in a horizontal line, all operating the Chiquitacla, driving the wooden points into the earth in unison, stepping, prying, and stepping backward.
They were followed immediately by an equal number of women who utilized the racana and wakana
to swiftly break the clods apart and carefully sow the seeds into the freshly opened earth.
And this grueling manual labor was culturally elevated. They did not toil in silence.
They worked to the rhythm of organized chants and communal songs, turning the agricultural labor into a synchronized performance.
It was an act of profound social and spiritual significance. The division between daily survival and religious obligation did not exist.
Farming was heavily ritualized at every stage.
Before a single Chiquitacla broke the soil, the community would perform ceremonies.
They would pour chicha, a fermented maize beer, into the irrigation canals and directly onto the earth to curry favor with localized deities and the earth mother, Pachamama.
They sacrificed llamas and guinea pigs to ensure a successful harvest, reading the entrails for agricultural omens.
Because the Andean climate was so consistently unforgiving, with the ever-present looming threats of sudden frost, catastrophic hail, and drought.
The act of agriculture was perceived almost as a form of physical combat against the elements.
You were fighting the mountain for your survival. The historian Tian Deltroy encapsulates this mentality perfectly with a quote from his research.
What did he say?
He said, "The Incas approached farming with weapons in their hands and prayers on their lips. They viewed their agricultural tools as weapons of survival."
That framing is very accurate.
Okay, let's unpack this. You have battled the mountain. You have engineered the thermal battery terraces. You have mathematically routed the water.
Right.
You have survived the frost. And you have successfully harvested thousands of tons of potatoes and maize.
A massive yield.
Now you face a massive logistical crisis. How do you store thousands of tons of biological matter in an environment that constantly fluctuates between freezing cold nights and intense humid days?
Because a harvested potato left on the ground will rot in weeks.
So how did they keep it from rotting?
The Inca developed preservation technologies that were every bit as sophisticated as their hydraulic engineering. To handle the massive potato harvests, they utilized an indigenous, high-altitude, freeze-drying method.
To create a resilient product called quinoa.
Quinoa, exactly. The process is entirely dependent on the specific climate of the Andes.
How does it work?
When the potato harvest was brought in, workers would spread the raw tubers out on the ground on beds of straw. They intentionally exposed the potatoes to the severe sub-freezing temperatures of the high Andean nights.
Let's look at the cellular biology of what happens to the potato during the night.
Okay.
The water inside the plant cells freezes, expands into ice crystals, and physically ruptures the cell walls of the potato.
That cellular rupture is the critical step.
Because the cell breaks open.
Once the cell walls are destroyed, the moisture is free to escape. When the intense high-altitude sun rises during the day, the temperature spikes.
So it thaws rapidly.
The solar radiation rapidly evaporates and sublimates the moisture directly from the ruptured cells.
And they actively aided this process.
To accelerate the process, the people would physically walk over the potatoes, stomping on them with bare feet, to squeeze out any remaining water hidden deep in the tissue.
They would repeat this cycle, freezing at night, sun-drying and stomping during the day, for several days until the potato was completely and entirely dehydrated.
That freeze-dried quinoa is incredibly light, making it easy for llamas to transport across the empire.
It is stripped of moisture, making it almost completely immune to mold and rot.
But you still need a physical structure to protect these strategic food stores from the heavy rains, rodents, and pests.
And for that, the state built the quokka.
The quokka. These were the state-sponsored storehouses.
And they did not just build a few regional hubs. They built tens of thousands of quokkas distributed systematically across the entire expanse of the empire.
The logistical network of the quokkas was staggering in its scale. They were constructed strategically along the 40,000 kilometers of the meticulously paved Inca road system.
They were specifically concentrated near tambos.
Tambos were state-run inns, relay stations, and supply depots.
They were located precisely a day's march apart, which calculates to roughly 22 kilometers.
This meant an army on the march or a state courier was never more than one day away from shelter and food.
The architecture of the individual kolkha was meticulously standardized by state engineers to maximize preservation. They were exclusively built on steep, dry hillsides.
Always on hillsides.
Why build a warehouse on a steep hill?
2 reasons. First, absolute drainage. Water cannot pool around the foundation.
And second,
Altitude and wind. By building on the slopes above the valley floor, they took advantage of natural, constant thermal updrafts and cooler ambient air, keeping the internal temperature of the warehouse perpetually low.
and the shape of the building itself was dictated entirely by the physics of what it held.
Form follows function.
If you look at the ruins of a quokka, you will see two distinct shapes.
Right.
If a quokka was rectangular, it was specifically designed for root crops, like fresh potatoes and the freeze-dried chunyo.
These tubers were carefully layered inside with thick bundles of dry straw, which acted as a desiccant, absorbing any ambient moisture from the air.
If the quokka was round, it was specifically designed to hold maize.
Maize was shelled and stored in massive, porous ceramic jars that allowed the grain to breathe.
The internal climate control of the quokkas was highly engineered to manipulate airflow.
They did not just have dirt floors.
They featured deep gravel floors to drain away any potential groundwater seepage.
More importantly, they possessed subfloor ventilation channels.
Based on the principles of thermodynamics, these low channels drew cool, dry air in from beneath the structure.
As the air inside the warehouse inevitably warmed slightly, it would rise.
The engineers left an exhaust opening under the overhanging thatched roof, allowing the warm air to escape.
This created a constant passive Bernoulli-style airflow that kept the interior exceptionally cool, dark, and dry.
The efficacy of this system is hard to overstate. Because of this passive climate control, regular foodstuffs like maize could last 2 full years in storage without spoiling.
And freeze-dried products like quinoa could be preserved for up to 4 years.
These warehouses held vast, calculated surpluses of potatoes, maize, quinoa, and dried llama jerky, but they also functioned as strategic armories, holding vast quantities of textiles, raw wool, bronze weapons, and sandals.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this immense decentralized storage system effectively replaced the need for a monetary economy or traditional commerce based on currency.
The wealth of the Inca Empire was not measured in gold or silver coins. Gold was purely ceremonial.
The true wealth, the power of the state, was measured in stored calories and preserved textiles.
The state operated as a massive redistributive economy.
During times of localized famine, a severe drought, or a devastating earthquake, the Thapa Inca did not send money to the affected province.
The state administrators would open the local qualcas and systematically redistribute the stored food to the affected populations.
It was a mechanism for ensuring total political loyalty and maintaining social stability.
It also provided the logistical backbone for their rapid, aggressive military expansion.
When the Inca army marched, they did not need to waste energy foraging, and they did not pillage the local farms of the people they were trying to integrate.
They were supplied directly, calorie by calorie, from the state qualcas situated along the road network.
Managing that inventory requires high-level data processing. You have thousands of warehouses spread over thousands of miles.
The administrators knew exactly how many tons of maize were in a specific qualca 300 miles away.
They tracked this data meticulously using the quipu.
The quipu?
The quipu was a complex, tactile recording device utilizing spun and knotted strings. It operated on a base 10 positional system.
So they read the strings.
By analyzing the type of knot, a figure 8 knot, a long knot, a simple overhand knot, its position on the string, the color of the string, and the type of fiber used, the administrators could record precise numerical data, census figures, and inventory levels, transmitting complex bureaucratic information without a written alphabet.
It is a profound testament to their organizational capacity, blending mathematics, textiles, and logistics.
It truly is.
But we are not just analyzing ancient history in a vacuum. The engineering principles they developed to survive the Andes centuries ago are actively being studied and applied today to address modern, catastrophic climate challenges.
Because Peru is currently facing a severe existential water crisis.
Over the last 50 years, due to accelerating global climate change, Peru has lost 54% of its glacial cover.
Those high-altitude glaciers are not just scenery. They are the primary, slow-release source of fresh water for the arid coastal river valleys and the major population centers.
When the glaciers disappear, the water disappears.
The modern standard engineering response to water management and retention in the Andes has largely been the construction of heavy concrete dams.
The logic is simple. Block the river, create a reservoir.
However, the Andes are a zone of extreme, constant seismic activity. The tectonic plates are constantly shifting.
And modern concrete dams are structurally rigid.
When they are subjected to regular earthquakes and the intense shear forces of a tremor, the rigid concrete inevitably cracks, degrades, and fails.
In these remote, high-altitude regions, modern concrete dams rarely last more than 20 to 30 years before becoming structurally compromised, leaking, or becoming entirely obsolete due to maintenance failures.
This modern engineering failure brings us to the work of Dr. Kevin Lane, a Gibraltarian archaeologist and senior researcher.
Supported by major international donors, including the Gerda Henkel Foundation, the Hart Family Fund, the McKnight Foundation, and the World Monument Fund.
Dr. Lane is leading a project that explicitly looks backward into antiquity to solve this modern crisis.
He and his team are not pouring new concrete. They are mapping and physically restoring 600-year-old Inca dams in the Cordillera Negra mountain range, operating in brutal conditions at altitudes above 4,000 meters.
Dr. Lane's project explicitly demonstrates the structural superiority of ancient engineering in this highly specific tectonic context.
He and his team have successfully excavated and restored the ancient Ricococha and Huitacocha dams located near the remote community of Pamporomas.
These restorations are not museum pieces, they are functional infrastructure.
They now guarantee a stable, year-round water supply for the 600 inhabitants of that community.
By restoring the water flow, the community has been able to reactivate ancient agricultural terraces that had been abandoned and dry for centuries.
The project is highly successful and is currently expanding, with upcoming restorations planned for the ancient dams at Xucloc in Huaraz Province, Chacras 1 and 2 in Ayllur Province, and Yanacancha 6 in Noriayos Province.
The fundamental physical reason these Inca dams work for centuries, where modern concrete fails in decades, comes down to one principle: flexibility.
The Incas built these dams utilizing interlocking, semi-dry stone construction. They fitted the rocks together meticulously, but they did not fuse them into a single monolithic block with rigid mortar.
When a massive earthquake hits, the kinetic energy moves to the earth. A rigid concrete wall tries to resist the energy, absorbs the shear force, and shatters.
An Inca stone wall behaves differently.
It shimmies, shifts slightly, absorbs the kinetic energy through the friction of the individual stones, and then settles back into place, intact.
Dr. Lane's team takes that 600-year-old flexible, earthquake-resistant stone foundation and modernizes it minimally.
They line the ancient stone with modern synthetic waterproof membranes and install contemporary PVC piping for controlled release.
They create a hybrid solution. It is highly resistant to seismic activity, extremely low cost to build, and requires minimal maintenance.
Out of the 600 mapped ancient dams in this specific region, the team has identified 260 that are structurally sound enough to be fully rehabilitated using this hybrid method.
This approach highlights a critical intersection of heritage archaeology and modern utility, but the technological viability of the stones and membranes is only one half of the equation.
Dr. Lane himself notes that the deciding factor for restoring these ancient dams isn't just the physical engineering, it's the sociology. Community buy-in is the absolute critical variable.
The human element dictates the success of the technology.
Even if a 600-year-old dam is perfectly situated, structurally sound, and primed for rehabilitation, the project will fail if the local population does not want to maintain it.
In many cases, local communities hold a culturally ingrained preference for modern cement infrastructure.
A concrete dam is often perceived as a symbol of modernity, progress, and state investment, despite its well-documented physical flaws in a seismic zone.
If the community insists on cement, the ancient structure cannot be successfully restored because they will not participate in its upkeep.
The technology only works when the community actively chooses to accept it, value it, and integrate it into their daily lives.
So what does this all mean?
It challenges our fundamental, linear assumptions about what constitutes progress. We are currently facing a severe global climate crisis that threatens our baseline agricultural stability worldwide. What if the future of our global climate resilience isn't found exclusively in inventing completely new, highly complex, rigid technologies that fight against the environment? What if the viable solution involves humbly returning to the precise, localized, and nature-integrated engineering of the past? The Incas survived the absolute extremes of the Andes by deeply understanding and working with the thermodynamics, the hydrology, and the physics of the mountain, rather than trying to overpower them. The question we must seriously ask ourselves today is, can we build a modern vertical archipelago for the 21st century, one that integrates with nature rather than attempting to pave over it?
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.